The entire military base went silent in a way no one there had ever experienced before. Boots that had been marching stopped mid-step. Conversations died instantly. Even the instructors froze where they stood. Every pair of eyes locked onto the same unbelievable moment unfolding in the open training yard. A four-star general, known for his temper and iron authority, stepped forward without warning. His jaw was tight. His face burned red with irritation. In front of hundreds of elite soldiers and officers, he reached out and grabbed Steven Seagal by the hair, hard. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Some soldiers instinctively moved forward, then stopped, unsure if they were even allowed to breathe. Cameras that had been recording the demonstration lowered slowly, hands shaking. No one touched a civilian like that. No one touched a guest like that. And certainly no one touched Steven Seagal like that. The general yanked Steven's head back and sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "So this is the legend? This is what Hollywood calls dangerous?" Steven didn't shout. He didn't struggle. He didn't even flinch. That calm was terrifying. Moments earlier, the base had been buzzing with excitement. Steven Seagal had been invited as a special guest to observe a close combat demonstration. Some soldiers whispered his name in disbelief. Others rolled their eyes, assuming he was just another movie star playing tough on screen. But now, everything felt different. The general's grip tightened. His voice dripped with arrogance. "You think a few movies make you a warrior?" The soldiers waited for Steven to react, to speak, to protest. He did none of it. Instead, he slowly lifted his eyes and looked straight ahead, focused, controlled, unreadable, not at the general's face, but past it, like he was measuring something no one else could see. The air grew heavy. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Everyone expected shouting. Everyone expected chaos. No one expected what came next. Because in that single moment of silence, while the general still had his hand tangled in Steven Seagal's hair, the balance of power on that entire base quietly shifted. And when Steven finally moved, the story of that day would be told for years. To understand how that moment even happened, you have to understand the atmosphere on the base that morning. It was meant to be routine, controlled, professional. The military installation was hosting a high-level close combat demonstration, something designed to impress visiting officials and reaffirm discipline among the ranks. Rows of elite soldiers stood in perfect formation under the sharp morning sun, boots polished, faces expressionless, every movement calculated. High-ranking officers filled the observation platform. Among them stood a four-star general known throughout the command for his uncompromising attitude. He believed discipline came from fear, not respect. His voice alone had ended careers. Steven Seagal arrived quietly. No motorcade, no dramatic entrance, no entourage demanding attention. He wore plain black pants and a simple jacket. His hair was tied back neatly. To anyone who didn't recognize him, he looked like just another civilian consultant. Calm, observant, unremarkable. Some soldiers noticed him immediately. Their eyes widened, whispers spread down the line. They had grown up watching his films, seeing him move with effortless control, dropping opponents twice his size like they were nothing. Others scoffed. "Movie fighter." One muttered. "Fake stuff," another whispered. The general noticed those reactions and smiled. From the moment Steven stepped onto the training ground, the general's mood shifted. He leaned toward another officer and said with a quiet laugh, "So this is who they brought? An actor?" The demonstration began. Elite soldiers moved with precision. Strikes, grapples, takedowns. The crowd watched closely. The general nodded approvingly, clapping sharply after each sequence, making sure everyone knew who commanded the ground. Steven watched in silence. He didn't critique. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to impress anyone. That silence irritated the general more than any comment could have. During a brief pause, the general stepped forward and addressed the soldiers loudly. "Real combat," he said, "is not choreographed, it's not pretty, and it's certainly not something you learn from movies." His eyes drifted toward Steven. A few soldiers followed his gaze. The tension thickened. The general walked closer, slow and deliberate, boots crunching against the gravel. He stopped just inches from Steven and looked him up and down, as if inspecting equipment he already deemed useless. "So tell me," the general said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "what exactly are you here to teach us?" Steven met his eyes calmly. "I'm here to observe," he replied. That answer drew scattered laughter. The general scoffed. "Observe?" he repeated. "You don't look like someone who belongs on a military base." Steven said nothing more. That was the breaking point. To the general, silence was disrespect. and in his world, disrespect demanded correction. He stepped even closer, invading Steven's personal space, his voice sharp, his authority unquestioned. Soldiers stiffened, officers exchanged uneasy glances. No one intervened, no one dared. And then, in a move that stunned everyone watching, the general reached out his hand and grabbed Steven Seagal by the hair. That was the moment when routine became history. The second the general's fingers tightened in Steven Seagal's hair, the air on the base changed. It wasn't just shock, it was instinct. Every trained soldier there felt it, the sudden awareness that a line had been crossed. Not a verbal line, not a professional one, a personal line, the kind that once stepped over could never be undone. Gasps broke out across the formation. A few soldiers shifted their weight, muscles tensing on reflex before discipline forced them still. Cameras that had been recording the demonstration began to shake. Some stopped entirely, their operators unsure whether what they were witnessing was even allowed to exist. The general leaned in closer, his grip firm, almost daring someone to challenge him. "You see," he said loudly, "this is real authority, not movie tricks, not fake legends." Steven didn't answer. That silence hit harder than any insult. The general mistook it for fear. His chest expanded with confidence, and he tightened his grip just a little more. "This is what happens," he continued, "when civilians forget their place on a military base." Steven's face remained calm, his breathing steady, his eyes unfocused, not on the general's face, but somewhere deeper, like a man counting seconds in his own mind. Those closest to him noticed something strange. Steven wasn't resisting, but he wasn't relaxed either. His posture was balanced, his shoulders loose, his weight evenly distributed, as if his body had quietly prepared itself without conscious thought. The general, blinded by ego, didn't notice any of it. He laughed and looked around at the soldiers. "Look at him," he said. "Not so dangerous now, is he?" A few nervous chuckles followed, but they died quickly. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. One senior officer took a half step forward, then stopped. Protocol screamed at him to intervene, but fear of the general's reputation froze him in place. Steven finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, almost gentle. "Let go." The general sneered. Or what? That was the last mistake. Without warning, without tension, without visible effort, Steven moved. It wasn't fast in the way movies portray speed. It was efficient, precise. In a single fluid motion, Steven shifted his weight forward, twisted his shoulders slightly, and rotated his head just enough to loosen the grip. At the same time, his hand came up, not to strike, but to capture the general's wrist. There was a sharp crack, not a bone-breaking, but authority-shattering. The general's laughter vanished instantly. His balance disappeared as his wrist was turned at an impossible angle. His knees buckled, and before anyone could react, his body was pulled forward and down. He hit the ground hard. The impact echoed across the training yard like a dropped weapon. Dust rose, boots shuffled in shock. Steven released him immediately and took one step back. No follow-up, no strike, no humiliation, just control. The general lay on the ground, stunned, his face pressed into the gravel, his arm pinned by his own momentum. His authority, moments ago unquestionable, now felt fragile, exposed. The base was silent again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was realization. For several long seconds, no one moved. The training yard, once alive with commands, footsteps, and controlled chaos, felt frozen in time. Soldiers stood rigid, unsure whether to rush forward or remain still. Officers stared in disbelief, their minds struggling to process what their eyes had just witnessed. A four-star general was on the ground, not attacked, not beaten, but neutralized. Steven Seagal stood a few steps away, calm and composed, his hands relaxed at his sides. His expression showed no anger, no pride, only restraint. It was as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. The general groaned and tried to push himself up. His arm trembled, refusing to cooperate. A sharp breath escaped his mouth as pain finally caught up with his ego. Medics instinctively took a step forward, then hesitated. No one had given an order, and no one wanted to be the first to speak. The soldiers' training told them to respect rank above all else. Their instincts told them something else entirely. This wasn't rebellion, this wasn't chaos, this was consequence. Whispers began to ripple through the formation, low and cautious. "Did you see that?" He didn't even strike him. He controlled him. A senior officer finally broke the silence. Stand down, he said quietly, his voice shaking. Stephen glanced at the general, still on the ground, then looked away. He wasn't watching to see who noticed him. He wasn't waiting for applause or approval. He simply stepped back, giving space, as if returning control to the base itself. The general was helped to his knees by two officers. His face was flushed, not just from pain but from humiliation. He avoided looking at the soldiers, avoided looking at Stephen. For the first time that morning his voice was gone. The commanding presence that once dominated the base felt hollow. Stephen finally spoke. His voice carried clearly across the yard, but it wasn't loud. "No one here did anything wrong," he said. "This ends now." That sentence alone shifted the energy. He wasn't challenging authority. He wasn't embarrassing anyone. He was restoring order. The soldiers straightened almost instinctively. The tension in their shoulders eased. It was subtle but powerful. One young soldier near the back whispered, "That's discipline." An officer cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Sir," he said carefully, addressing Stephen, "are you all right?" Stephen nodded once. "I am." Then he looked at the general, really looked at him. Not with superiority, not with judgment, but with something closer to disappointment. "Leadership," Stephen said calmly, "isn't proven by force. It's proven by restraint." The words landed harder than the takedown. The general swallowed. His eyes dropped to the ground. Around him, the base seemed different now, quieter, more aware. Soldiers who had once feared him now saw him as human, fallible, and that realization echoed louder than any command ever had. The demonstration was officially over, though no one announced it. Slowly, formations were dismissed. Soldiers walked away in silence, knowing they had just witnessed something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. As Stephen turned to leave the training yard, no one stopped him. No one questioned him. They didn't need to, because in a place built on power, structure, and command, they had just learned the difference between authority and control. As Steven Seagal walked toward the edge of the training yard, the silence followed him like a shadow. No one spoke. No one dared to fill the space with questions or excuses. The dust stirred lightly beneath his steps, and for a moment it seemed as though the entire base was holding its breath. Then the sound came, the low hum of engines. Heads turned toward the front gates as a line of black vehicles rolled through, slow and deliberate. Their presence was unmistakable. These weren't routine transports or supply trucks. They moved with purpose, authority, and intent. The vehicles stopped. Doors opened. Several high-ranking officials stepped out, men in pressed uniforms, insignias heavy with years of service. Among them were senior defense advisors and command inspectors, individuals whose visits were never unannounced and never insignificant. Murmurs spread instantly. "What's going on? Who are they?" The general stiffened where he stood, still supported by officers. His face drained of color. He recognized them, and worse, he recognized the timing. One of the officials stepped forward, scanning the yard until his eyes locked onto Stephen. Relief washed across his face. "Mr. Seagal," he called out, his tone respectful. "We've been trying to reach you." Every soldier froze. The title alone sent a ripple through the ranks. This wasn't a casual greeting. This was acknowledgement. Stephen stopped and turned calmly. "Yes," he replied. The official approached, lowering his voice but not his respect. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "You were scheduled to observe today's demonstration as part of a classified evaluation." The words hit the air like thunder. An evaluation, not a visit, not a courtesy. The general's breathing grew shallow. His authority, already cracked, now felt dangerously close to collapse. The official continued, his voice steady. "You were recommended for this role due to your extensive experience in advanced defensive tactics and operational restraint." Eyes widened. Soldiers exchanged stunned glances. This wasn't Hollywood. This was real. The general finally found his voice. "Evaluation?" he repeated. "Of what?" The official turned to him slowly. "Of leadership," he answered. That single word stripped the yard bare. Stephen took a step forward, not as a challenger, but as a witness. "I came here to observe," he said evenly, "to see how authority is exercised when no one expects consequences." He paused, letting the words settle. "What I saw," he continued, "was strength used to intimidate, not to protect. No accusation, no insult, just truth." The general lowered his head. Around him, officers stood rigid, suddenly aware that every action, every command, every decision might now be questioned. The official nodded slowly. "The demonstration is concluded," he announced. "We'll be reviewing today's events immediately." Steven looked around the base one last time, at the soldiers who had stayed disciplined, at the officers who had hesitated but learned. "This place has potential," he said quietly, "but respect has to come before rank." With that, he turned away. The black vehicles waited. Doors opened once more, and as Steven Seagal stepped inside, the base finally exhaled, knowing that what had been revealed that day would change far more than one career. The gates closed behind the black vehicles, and the training yard slowly returned to motion, but nothing felt the same. Commands were given again. Boots began to move, yet every order now carried a different weight, as if the base itself had absorbed the lesson of what had just occurred. The general stood near the platform, his arm wrapped and his posture stiff. Officers surrounded him, waiting for instructions that didn't come. For the first time in his career, he wasn't the loudest presence in the room. A senior command inspector stepped forward. "Sir," he said evenly, "we need to speak privately." There was no refusal, no protest. The general nodded once and followed. The confidence that once defined his stride had vanished, replaced by something unfamiliar, reflection. Inside the command building, the door closed quietly. No shouting echoed through the halls, no raised voices, only measured questions and uncomfortable silence. Outside, soldiers were dismissed in small groups. Conversations stayed hushed. Some replayed the moment again and again in their minds. Others said nothing at all, knowing they had witnessed a rare truth. Authority could be challenged without chaos, corrected without violence. Hours passed. When the general finally emerged, he looked different. His face was pale, his eyes tired. The insignia on his uniform felt heavier now, no longer symbols of unquestioned power, but reminders of responsibility. He called the officers together. His voice was steady but softer. "Today," he said, "lines were crossed." The officers stiffened. "By me," he added. That admission hit harder than any punishment. "I mistook control for leadership," he continued, "and discipline for fear." No one interrupted. "I will be stepping back from active command pending review," he said. "Until then, operations will continue under interim leadership." The yard remained silent. No cheers, no relief, just respect. Later that evening, word spread across the base. Not exaggerated, not distorted, clear, honest. Steven Seagal had not demanded consequences. He had not filed complaints. He had not embarrassed anyone publicly. He had simply acted and allowed truth to do the rest. The general stood alone near the training ground as the sun began to set. He looked at the gravel where he had fallen earlier that day. Slowly, he removed his cap and held it in his hands. For the first time, he understood. Power didn't come from rank. Strength didn't come from volume. Respect came from restraint. That night, the base felt quieter, but stronger. Soldiers slept knowing their leaders were being held to the same standards they enforced. Officers reflected on the kind of authority they wanted to represent. And somewhere far from the base, Steven Seagal continued on his way, unchanged, uncelebrated, unbothered. Because for him, the lesson had never been about winning. It had been about reminding everyone what real control looks like. Weeks passed, but the story of that day refused to fade. It spread quietly at first, shared in low voices between soldiers during late-night duty shifts, repeated in training halls, remembered during moments when tempers flared and authority was tested. It wasn't told as gossip. It was told as a lesson. The base had changed. Orders were still firm. Discipline was still strict. But something was different now. Leaders spoke before they shouted. Correction came before punishment. Respect was no longer demanded by rank alone. It was earned through example. New command rotated in during the review period. Briefings were shorter, training was sharper, and whenever tensions rose, someone would inevitably say, "Remember what happened. That was all it took." No names needed. The general eventually returned, quieter and more composed. He didn't try to reclaim the fear he once commanded. Instead, he focused on rebuilding trust. Some soldiers noticed, others waited, but all of them understood one thing. Power could be lost in a second, but respect took time to recover. Steven Seagal never spoke publicly about the incident. No interviews, no headlines, no dramatic retellings. To him, the moment had passed. The instant control was restored. The world would move on, and so would he, but the lesson stayed. True strength isn't loud, it doesn't need permission, and it doesn't announce itself. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one making threats. It's the one who doesn't need to. That day proved something timeless. When ego leads, authority collapses. When restraint leads, everyone stands taller. Respect isn't about who salutes first. It's about who remains calm when disrespected. Because one moment of unchecked arrogance can undo a lifetime of rank, and one moment of self-control can restore order without leaving scars. Every soldier who witnessed it carried that truth forward into future commands, into leadership roles, into moments where anger tempted them to prove something. They remembered the silence, they remembered the control, they remembered the difference, and they chose better. If you believe real strength comes from discipline, not dominance, type respect in the comments and tell us where you're watching from, because humility isn't weakness, it's mastery, and mastery never needs to raise its voice.